What if I told you it was just one change in the Blue Lock story that killed the defenders and midfielders? First, I'll be talking about Blue Lock's original premise. Then, I'll be discussing the premise change that caused Blue Lock to go in different directions. Lastly, I'll discuss how this premise shift killed the non-striker positions and the consequences it will continue to have in the story. Enjoy. First, let's talk about the original premise set by Blue Lock. In the story of Blue Lock, Japan's soccer team has made great strides in the last few years. Due to its collectivized nature and its desire for teamwork, it has created world-class midfielders and defenders. However, despite this growth, it is often limited by one position, that being the striker. Now, the striker position requires one key element, that is, the ego. However, Japan typically neglects and straight up rejects concepts like egotism or individualism. This has created a problem because without this, Japan's soccer team would only ever be average at best. Therefore, the Blue Lock initiative was created by Jinpachi Igo and Tenri Honori in order to find out one striker. 300 of the best strikers in Japan will compete in an elimination style game where the top 5 will join the U20 team, mixing those amazing world-class midfielders and defenders with top-tier egotistical strikers to fully complete the Japanese team. Now, before I continue, I of course feel the need to defend my position. With a story ranging over 300 chapters like Blue Lock, it's entirely possible that a lot of the fanbase has forgotten about these initial elements, as stories typically create retcons or changes to their narrative in order to better please the audience, so for that reason a lot of people don't really remember what goes on very early in the manga, so allow me to refresh everyone's memory. For starters, originally only 5 people were supposed to survive Blue Lock. It is blatantly stated in chapter 2 of the Blue Lock manga, so that is not up for debate. Secondly, Jinpachi Igo himself has claimed that due to Japan's society, they have created quote world-class midfielders and also have top-tier defenders. Remember, the U20 squad was originally praised for its intense defense. So those are the facts of the situation, and I don't use that term lightly because I do know that in the Blue Lock community and frankly a lot of anime communities, people like to use speculation as sort of proven facts when nothing's been confirmed yet. But again, these are 100% confirmed. That being said, I think the premise right now is very solid, it fits logically, and it's still going to be able to introduce us to a bunch of different characters. Maybe there's a time skip once the winners are decided from Blue Lock, we don't know, but right now the story's looking good. So what exactly is this change that completely altered everything? Hey guys, before I continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching the video, but please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notification, you know the rest. That being said, I also want to say a huge thank you to everybody. In my last video on how Onazi is going to save Blue Lock from elimination, got a lot of love, got a bunch of new subscribers, so thank you very much. If you guys haven't seen it, I really suggest that you do. It's going to be in the end credit as per usual, so please go ahead and give it a watch. But with that, on to the video. So the change itself was ultimately the decision that all 11 spots of the U20 roster was going to be revolved around Blue Lock players, or at least almost 11. You see, right before the third selection, Barasuta decides to cut down the program due to the amount of money that it is wasting. So Jinpachi Igo decides to offer him a match. The U20 roster versus the Blue Lock 11. Barasuta agrees because 1, he thinks that they're going to crush Blue Lock anyway, and 2, he believes this show match is going to be able to bring some revenue, so he thinks why not. Now as we know, the Blue Lock 11 ended up defeating the U20 team, therefore Blue Lock ends up absorbing the U20 roster. This means that all the players of Blue Lock, including the U20 original roster, can now essentially compete for the spots on the roster. But why exactly was this a bad thing? Well, as previously mentioned, it was established that Blue Lock only was supposed to be for the strikers, as Japan was already very pleased with their midfielders and their defenders. But now they're essentially forcing former strikers to take up those positions. And this leads to a whole slew of issues. After all, the show's premise was pure egotism, and the only thing that matters is whether you can score a goal or not. So now you grab these players from this sort of mindset and you put them in roles that were traditionally meant to have teamwork. And while these roles do have teamwork, in the Blue Lock universe, there's always some sort of mental gymnastics in order to justify why someone, through the lens of pure egoism, wants to be a playmaker, for example. It's not enough for a player to say, I want to be a defender because I love just playing defense for the sake of teamwork, or a midfielder because they love making plays, and they just care about the team. And again, this sort of philosophy of teamwork was what made Japan have good midfielders and defenders, so again, I don't see the point to have to change that. But now, whenever there is a prominent midfielder or defender, there has to be some sort of backstory as to why they're not a striker. It has to involve sort of ideals of them being crushed or forced into the position, as opposed to someone who just simply takes pride in those roles. A perfect example, and manga spoilers, but Hugo from France's New Gen World 11 is someone who's trying to think very deeply into these positions. Now, a lot of what he says is very interesting, and this dynamic at least has brought in a lot of deep thoughts, especially with things like geniuses versus fast learners, different kinds of egos, and things of that nature can be very interesting. The problem is only if it's used sparingly. But at this point, the show feels like mental gymnastics. I'm sure if I dig really deep into all these different philosophies, I could find a reason of how egocentrism does eventually lead to these same outcomes. But I shouldn't have to, because these things shouldn't have to be complicated. It's perfectly reasonable for someone to say, hey, I like playing midfielder because I just like passing the ball. I enjoy passing the ball and getting other people goals. But because the show ended up demonizing this sort of philosophy because it was originally only for top 5 strikers to make it out of Blue Lock, which was not necessary for them because their job was to score the ball, the story has essentially shot itself in the foot and put itself in a really awkward corner where it needs these constant explanations as to why something that should be so simple now needs to be deep. Because if you lose Karasu in these recent chapters, and again, spoiler alert, but he just essentially playmade for Hiyori-Oh to score a goal, and it shows that he's willing to be the number 2, or essentially the one that playmates their Blue Lock, you actually have this kind of funny, ironic situation where Karasu, who would like to score goals, went to Blue Lock, a place that's supposed to facilitate egoism and people who just want to score goals like a striker, and by the time he comes out, he's a playmaker now. Which is, what? Again, just last time, I know people are going to get in the comments and being like, I don't understand, I don't know what I'm talking about, I guess I just haven't looked so deep into it. But let me say it like this. I expect Neon Genesis Evangelion, Jujutsu Kaisen, Psycho Pass. I expect a level of deep thought from these shows. I don't expect to fully understand any of these shows 100%, and that's okay because it's the premise they set for me. But when you look at Blue Lock, again, let's look at that original sort of puzzle. Blue Lock was only supposed to be that missing piece that needed the egoism. But now that it went from Blue Lock being that last piece to complete overhaul of everything to do with the formation of soccer, now it's essentially having to justify its own contrarianism. It's essentially Sundays. I didn't pass the ball because I wanted to, baka. I passed it to you because it's going to somehow lead me to scoring in the future, and yeah. That's why in this series, there's never a top tier defender. Or there's always a contradiction where for some reason you have strikers guarding other strikers because due to the premise that the show has shifted to, it's not possible for a defender to stand out, with the exception of someone like Don Lorenzo and occasionally Oliver Aiku. Oh, and as much of a GOAT as he is, you tell me that Gin Gagamaru suddenly became a world-class goalkeeper? It sounds kind of, dumb, but like, this is kind of the situation that Blue Lock just has to operate under because of its own shortcomings. But in conclusion, Blue Lock is a story about how originally the Blue Lock initiative was supposed to find the missing striker filled with ego to round off the U20 team that was otherwise pretty good but was just missing the last striker. Instead, the premise shifted to having a complete overhaul of all 11 positions, which of course is going to lead to issues because you cannot have a team of 11 strikers without some sort of shift in mentality, a mentality that however was ironclad drilled into their head, so thus nothing really makes sense anymore.